dress goes to the floor, so I have to be careful. All right. July 21st, 2021, I'm sitting in my apartment watching one of my quarantine friends play a game on Twitch. My mother calls. Hi, Elizabeth. I'm so sorry, but Bill died. Bill was my mother's cousin's husband, and I know that kind of sounds far away from me, but we're from the South. My mother and her cousin Mary grew up together. They were best friends. They both got married. They both had daughters. I arrived first. Mary's husband's name was Bill. When I was very, very young, in fact, too young to remember exactly when, he told me to call him Mamo. He thought this would be a cute little nickname that only I would call him. Little did he know he was messing with an undiagnosed, extremely literal autistic child. No one could call him Bill in my presence. He was Mamo. I got very angry about this. His name is Mamo. And you also have to understand, Mamo was cool. Mamo played the guitar. Mamo had an earring. He had long hair, which my dad did too, but he was a lawyer, so. And he worked in the clubs of New Orleans, because that's where he lived. And he used to go on tour with people. And when he passed away, his son found his roadie pass for Prince's Purple Rain tour. See, cool. He was so cool. I spent 2 weeks in the dead heat of July in New Orleans with them one time when I was about 13 or 14. This makes Sarah, his first child, my younger cousin, about 11, and then Jesse, the next child, 3. While there, he took me to Preservation Hall Jazz at midnight. Now, looking back, 41-year-old man, 13-year-old girl, maybe that didn't look exactly kosher. But we went there at midnight, and it was so amazing walking the streets of New Orleans when it was cool and dark, and there was so much music playing. And we got to Preservation Hall, and the place was packed, as anybody who's been there knows. And halfway through our time there, he managed to get us all the way up to the front row to sit on the cushions. The trombonist slide was moving between our heads, and we had to sit perfectly still. And jazz wrapped around my brain like the humidity stuck to my skin. And I remember being so happy because I was there with Mamo. And he taught me about music, and he taught me about rock and blues and jazz. And right then, at that point, he was the coolest person ever. Until he wasn't.
Let's go.
When you're young, your family members are gods. As you get older, you discover the flaws. And that's fine, everyone has flaws. Some are easier to overlook than others. There were times he was so capable of such compassion and kindness, but there were other times that he was selfish and cruel. There were times he was the greatest person on earth to me, and times I wish I could shield my cousins from him. And as I got even older, I started wondering, have I ever seen him without a drink in his hand? Time passed, and Katrina happened. And that was the moment when I started to see the person that I loved slip away. If there was anything that he loved more than music, he loved teaching history. He loved history. He could tell you about every single corner in New Orleans, just off the top of his head. But after Katrina, the school systems pretty much collapsed. The charter schools weren't a good place, and he began to slip further and further away into depression and alcohol, and it seemed that he didn't want to come back. The last time I saw him was in October of 2017 when I came to New Orleans for a conference. He asked if he could take me to dinner, and I went to dinner with Jesse, who is now over 21, certainly, and we went to Jack Dempsey's and had oysters on the half-shell, turtle soup, and fried catfish, and I drank sangria out of a goblet that had to hold with both hands. And he asked me how I was doing and how work was going, and I said, well, it's going well. I'm working at the UGA Music Library, and I'm bringing in so much rock and everything, and all this rock and blues and stuff like that. He said, are you playing? And I said, no. And he said, well, that's disappointing. The last time I spoke to him was my birthday, my 38th birthday, October 30th of 2020. I was having my birthday in quarantine, like a lot of people. I was watching kung fu movies over Zoom with a friend of mine while eating chips and cheese because the sushi had failed. My mother calls me and she says, I was just talking to Bill and I accidentally let slip that it's your birthday and he really wants to call you. I said, okay, that's fine. She's like, are you sure? And I was like, well, how drunk is he? At this point, that was a real question you had to ask. She said, he's not that bad, he's coherent. And I said, okay, then I'll answer the call. And I answered the call not just because it was Mamo, but because every time I picked up the phone, I thought maybe the Mamo that I used to know is gonna be on the other end. We talked, it was pleasant for a while, and he asked me again, are you playing? And I said, no. And he said, well, why aren't you playing? And I said to him, Mamo, when the thing you used to love becomes a prison, it's time to leave. And he said, well, maybe you're wise. But that hurt. And see, by that time, it was hard to argue with him about anything. And the real problem is that the reason that I'm not playing, the reason for all of that is my sensory issues have gotten worse over the years. I can't anymore. And after he died, I realized the reason that I got into music in the first place was now gone. And did I disappoint him? Did I go to the grave with me disappointing him, even though I was trying to do all these things that I still knew how to do because of my music degree? And I like to think that the person that he used to be is proud of me. And is proud that I am helping to select all manner of rock and Athens bands to be in the music library. Is proud of me for taking care of the students who walk in and helping them research and helping do this, because while I'm not a direct teacher, I am a teacher. And I think he's proud of me for taking care of my students like they need to be. I like to think this, and I think that I know it. When in existential dread and exhaustion now, often my radio lights up with the beginning notes of "You Can't Always Get What You Want" by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones was his very favorite band, and yes, I know the irony in that, in choosing that song. My mother and I believe that my grandfather lives in our cars because every time they have broken down, we have been able to get to safety very quickly. If Gramps lives in my car, Mamo lives in my radio.
Wow.